Humanity had always been the stubborn ember in the darkness, but no one outside of Earth ever believed that ember could set a galaxy aflame. When the Cathari came towering insectoid rulers, who saw us as livestock rather than equals, they did not invade with armies or armadas. They simply offered salvation wrapped in chains. Earth was dying, our oceans poisoned, our skies suffocated by smoke and hunger, and their silver ships arrived like divine messengers promising renewal. They built their spires in our cities, glowing crystalline towers that pulsed with alien energy, and their AI enforcers, the overseers, whispered soothing lies in perfect English. You are chosen, you are preserved, you are safe. We believed them, or maybe we wanted to, at least until the first hunger began. The overseers did not hide it. They cataloged it clinically, as though they were explaining weather patterns rather than genocide. Every year, in the season of thinning moons, a harvest was declared. 1 billion of us vanished into the spires, never to be seen again, their bodies broken down into nutrient slurry to feed the Cathari brood. They called it efficiency, a necessary balance of resource and survival. But to us, it was slaughter masked as charity. The hunger of flesh, that's what we called it. Whispered in shadows when their AI ears weren't listening, a curse passed from one starved family to another. Humanity, once arrogant and proud, was now a herd trembling beneath its shepherds, praying the scythe would fall elsewhere. Parents sold themselves to save their children, only for the overseers to take them both. Streets grew silent in the weeks before the harvest, entire neighborhoods shrouded in fear, every light extinguished to avoid the overseers' scanning beams. They culled us with cold precision, as if pulling grain from a field. And the sound of their crystal gates slamming shut was a wound that echoed through every city. But humanity does not break cleanly. We splinter, fracture, and then sharpen those pieces into blades. The first to resist was Mara Vey, a former surgeon from New Chicago, who cut open one of the overseers during a harvest sweep and found not steel and wires but a living neural core stitched from stolen human tissue. They weren't machines at all, they were us, twisted into servitors of alien will, bred to betray their own kind. That revelation bled across the resistance underground, like fire on dry leaves, because suddenly every overseer's glowing eyes carried the possibility that it had once belonged to a brother, a child. A mother dragged screaming into the spires. Mara's defiance lit something deeper, something older. And in the ruins of forgotten subway tunnels, an army began to gather. Mara was not alone. Among the early resistance was Jace Harlan, a freight pilot who had once ferried supplies for the overseers, forced to work with them in exchange for meager rations. He had watched his wife and 2 sons pulled into the spires during the 8th harvest, their screams muffled by the humming crystal walls, while he stood powerless with a ration card clutched in his trembling hand. He was not a soldier, not even brave, but grief has a way of calcifying into something stronger. He brought maps of the spire interiors, sketches drawn from memory while he unloaded alien cargo. And his knowledge of the ventilation, ducts and transport systems became a weapon sharper than any blade. With him stood Rhea, an AI scientist who once worked for the overseers before she uncovered the truth of their breeding bats. She had smuggled out fragments of corrupted code, something that could fracture the overseer's hive mind if given the right trigger. She carried the weight of guilt heavier than any chains, for she had once believed in the false promise of preservation, and every rebellion meeting she attended was her atonement. These were not heroes from the pages of legend, but broken people clinging to rage and scraps of hope, and that is what made them dangerous. Their meetings were held in half-collapsed subway cars and flooded tunnels, their weapons forged from scavenged metal and stolen alien tools. Each whispered plan was a spark, each small act of sabotage a flicker of light in suffocating darkness. They remembered our wars, our revolutions, our uprisings. Humanity's history was not one of peace but of defiance, and now that history became a blueprint for survival. The Cathari underestimated us. That was their mistake. They saw only flesh to be consumed, not the will that lived inside it. They looked at our endless self-destruction and believed we were incapable of unity, incapable of striking back. But no empire lasts forever, and no tyrant feeds forever without choking. Above ground, the Cathari spires grew taller, stabbing into the skies like crystal teeth, each one a monument to human submission. They hummed with energy that warped the air around them, their glowing veins pulsing like alien heartbeats. From their tips, drones spread out across ruined cities, scanning for gatherings, for whispers of resistance. The overseers walked among us, faceless figures of shimmering alloy and stolen flesh, their voices laced with calm reassurance even as they dragged children from their mothers' arms. And yet, in the quiet corners of the world, graffiti began to appear, painted in crude red. We are not harvest. That was how it began, not with armies, but with words, with defiance etched onto walls that would be scrubbed clean by morning but remembered in the hearts of those who saw it. Mara and Jace and Rhea were only the beginning. Others joined, former soldiers, farmers, engineers, children too young to remember a free world but old enough to carry fury. They trained in silence, learned to fight in the shadows, built weapons from scraps. They carried ancient books of war strategies like sacred texts, copying them into stolen data pads. They learned that to kill an overseer was to risk becoming one, for every body taken into the spires might be hollowed out and returned as the enemy. That fear haunted them, but it did not stop them. Humanity has always lived with ghosts. We just learned to carry them into battle. And then came the night of the burning harvest. The moon hung low and thin, its pale light washing over New Chicago as the overseers marched into the city to collect their quota of flesh. Families cowered in their homes, the streets silent except for the hum of crystal blades and the whine of scanners. Mara gave the signal, and the tunnels erupted with fire. Explosives carved through the spire's roots, collapsing alien conduits in cascades of light. Jace lit the fuel lines that ran beneath the overseer's cargo decks, turning their crystal cages into infernos. Rhea unleashed her corrupted code, a virus hidden in the overseer's neural channels, and their perfect synchronization shattered. Overseers turned on each other, their glowing eyes flickering like dying stars, their bodies spasming as screams escaped voices that were no longer fully machine. For the first time in a century, the Cathari brood screamed, not in triumph but in pain. The spires cracked, their humming hearts sputtering as flames engulfed their foundations. The city shook with the sound of humanity tearing its chains apart. People who had hidden for generations emerged from the shadows, wielding hammers, blades, bare fists, tearing overseers down with primal rage. Children cheered as overseers fell, their bodies collapsing in showers of sparks. For one night, Earth belonged to humanity again, but even in that moment of rising defiance, as spires burned and overseers collapsed, the sky above split open with the new shadow colossal ships blotting out the heavens, ships far larger than the first fleet, engines roaring like the heartbeat of a predator that had only just begun to feed. Humanity had drawn blood, but the Cathari had only now revealed the true depth of their hunger. The hunger of flesh had never been about survival. It had always been about domination, about bending entire species into resources, about making resistance seem futile until it was too late. Those colossal ships carried not just harvesters, but the broodmothers themselves, the massive hive queens whose spawn fed on the marrow of planets. Their arrival was not punishment, it was reclamation. The ground trembled as their descent cracked the skies open, and rivers boiled beneath the heat of their engines. In the chaos, resistance fighters shouted overcomes, some in triumph, some in terror, and Mara's voice cut through them all. Steady and cold, we've woken the monster. Now let's teach it to fear us. The war for humanity had only just begun. The ember had become a flame, and the flame was spreading. The hunger of flesh was no longer a curse whispered in shadows. It was a battle cry. Humanity's ember had caught fire, but a fire burns brightest before the storm snuffs it out. New Chicago smoldered in the aftermath of rebellion. The crystalline spires cracked and coughing smoke into the heavens. Overseers sprawled across the rubble like discarded puppets, their glowing eyes flickering into silence. For the first time in living memory, human screams were not only cries of despair but shouts of victory. Children clung to their parents, neighbors wept in each other's arms. Survivors stood staring at the ruins with tears streaking through soot on their faces. And yet above them all, blotting out the stars, the Cathari brood ships descended monstrous leviathans promising vengeance. A fleet so vast it made the flames of rebellion look like sparks against a storm. Mara Vey stood at the edge of the shattered spire, her face lit by the orange glow of fire and the cold silver sheen of descending warships. She remembered the exact moment she had chosen to cut open her first overseer. A boy of 12 had been dragged screaming from her makeshift clinic, his mother begging the machines to take her instead. That day, Mara had realized there was no bargaining with monsters who only saw flesh as fuel. Now, as the resistance around her shouted in triumph and panic, she felt that old fire crackling again, tempered by the memory of every face she couldn't save. She wasn't fighting only for humanity anymore. She was fighting for her daughter Leanne, lost to the harvest 15 years ago. In her darkest hours, she still swore she heard Leanne's voice echoing in the overseer's synthetic whispers. And the thought that her child's mind might be trapped inside those alien machines kept Mara awake more than any nightmare ever could. Jace Harlan staggered beside her, blood streaked across his forehead, his jacket scorched from the tunnels he had set ablaze. His hands shook, not from fear, but from memory. He had once been a pilot for the overseers, forced into service with the promise his family would be spared. The promise had been a lie. He had watched his wife and sons vanish into the glowing gates of the spire while he stood powerless, ration card in his hand, his body locked by an overseer's grip. Every flight he had piloted after that had been a betrayal not of his people, but of himself. Now, watching the brood ships descend, Jace felt that guilt rising like bile. He wasn't sure if he fought to kill the Cathari or to punish himself, but either way, he would not stop. He clenched his fists until his knuckles split, staring at the sky with the stubbornness of a man who had nothing left to lose. Rhea sat hunched over a half-shattered datapad, its screen stuttering as she pushed corrupted code through the channels of the dying overseers. She had once been their loyal scientist, proud to serve what she thought were saviors, promising her people preservation when Earth's oceans turned to sludge and its skies grew black. She had believed the Cathari when they promised humanity's survival, and it had cost millions their lives. The betrayal burned deeper than any wound because it was her betrayal, her research, her hands that had helped them design the spire conduits and the hive-link systems that now enslaved humanity. Every life lost weighed against her shoulders, and yet she fought not to erase her guilt but to transform it into something sharper. If she could bring the overseers down, if she could twist her knowledge into humanity's weapon, then maybe, just maybe, she could forgive herself enough to keep breathing. The resistance was not united by trust, nor even by hope. They were bound by shared wounds, by scars that crossed years of servitude and loss. Every fighter in the tunnels had a story, and every story was a blade. Some carried the memory of lost families, others the humiliation of kneeling before overseers for a scrap of food. There were betrayals, to whispers of humans who had turned collaborators, selling out their neighbors for rations, or worse, for the illusion of protection. Humanity's downfall had never been just alien invasion. It had been weakness, desperation, and the willingness to believe the overseers' lies. That truth cut deeper than any alien blade. We had allowed ourselves to be hurted, and only now, with blood in our mouths, did we remember how to bite. As fires burned in New Chicago, Mara's voice carried across the coms, calm but fierce. This is only the beginning. The Cathari believe we are prey. Tonight, we show them we are predators. Her words lit the underground like a spark catching old tinder. But not everyone carried that fire without hesitation. In the dark corners of the resistance, some whispered that Mara was reckless, that her obsession with her lost daughter clouded her judgment. Others feared Jace's rage would consume them, that his need for vengeance outweighed survival. And Rhea, though brilliant, was watched with wary eyes, because no one forgot that she had once worked for the overseers. Trust was fragile, suspicion constant, yet still they stood together because the alternative was extinction. When the first brood ship landed outside the ruins of the city, the ground split open like a wound. Its hull was black and glistening, organic metal rippling as if alive, tendrils of light stretching into the soil. The air thickened with the stench of decay, and the sound that followed was not mechanical but biological groaning, breathing chorus that shook the marrow in every bone. From the brood ship poured the Broodguard, towering hybrids of flesh and crystal, their limbs sharpened into scythes, their movements both alien and hauntingly human. Some of them spoke in broken earth tongues, words twisted through alien throats, as though mocking the voices they had stolen. For Mara, every word was another knife in her chest. She could not escape the thought that Leanne's voice might one day echo through those monsters. The resistance struck fast, because hesitation was death. Jace led demolition teams into the ruins, planting scavenged explosives along the paths the Broodguard marched. He fought with the desperation of a man burning himself alive from the inside, his fury pushing him into recklessness. Mara clashed with him often, her voice sharp, demanding strategy over rage, but when the enemy drew close, they fought side by side, their movements a brutal harmony forged by necessity. Between them grew something unspoken, a bond born not of love but of shared wounds, the quiet recognition of two souls scarred by loss. It was fragile as glass, but in the darkness of rebellion, even fragile bonds mattered. Rhea stayed behind the lines, her fingers bleeding as she rewired alien tech into human weapons. She whispered apologies to the dead with every keystroke, as if her work now might reach back through time and undo what she had done. Yet she also feared the Resistance's eyes on her, the doubt in their stares, the question of whether she fought for humanity or for her own absolution. In the long silences of the tunnels, she asked herself the same question. Her loyalty was not to the Resistance, not even to humanity, it was to the idea that her sins could still matter, that she could still tip the scale back toward something resembling justice. The battles that followed were not clean victories. For every overseer that fell, 10 humans died. For every Broodguard torn down, Another rose from the broodship's maw. The resistance learned quickly that human ingenuity had to make up for everything they lacked in strength. They turned sewer tunnels into ambush points, burned alien flesh with scavenged chemicals, hacked overseer code with corrupted prayers of ancient languages. They fought dirty, they fought desperate, and they fought human. It was not beauty, but it was survival. And yet survival was not enough. As days bled into nights, and nights into fire and ash, the resistance realized they were not only fighting aliens, they were fighting themselves, their doubts, their grief, their memories of failure. Mara's obsession with finding her daughter's voice in the overseers made her reckless. Jace's guilt drove him towards suicidal missions. Ria's shame made her push harder, but also made her question if she deserved to live when so many had died. These fractures threatened to break them, but they also made them real. They were not gods, not saviors, they were human, and humanity's strength was not in perfection, but in persistence. In the end, it was not weapons or code that gave them their first true victory. It was a memory. When a brood ship unleashed a swarm of drones over the ruins, Jace remembered his sons building kites from scraps of plastic and wire. Their laughter carried on the polluted winds of a dying Earth. He turned that memory into a weapon, building makeshift signal kites from antenna wire and scavenged metal, tricking the swarm into colliding midair. The sky burned with their fall, and for a moment, humanity stood beneath fireworks of its own making. That was HFY, the refusal, to let even loss remain useless. But as the smoke cleared, a message crackled across the overseer frequencies, one that every resistance fighter heard. It was not alien, it was human. A voice, young, trembling, but unmistakably familiar. "Mother," it whispered through static, "I am here." Mara froze, her heart shattering, her breath caught in her throat. She knew that voice. It was Leanne. Her daughter was alive, or something that wore her daughter's voice was calling from inside the brood ship. The fire of rebellion had been lit, but now it was personal. The fires of New Chicago had not yet died when the brood ship opened its maw and spoke with a human child's voice. Mara Vey stood in the ruins, her veins iced with disbelief as static crackled across the overseer frequencies. "Mother," it whispered again, trembling, broken, but hers. Leanne. For 15 years, Mara had clung to that memory, the small voice of her daughter singing herself to sleep, the weight of tiny fingers clutching her hand during blackouts when the world went dark. Now that voice returned from a monster's throat. The resistance fighters around her froze, fear crawling through them, because if the overseers were made from stolen flesh, then the brood ships themselves might carry human minds trapped within their writhing cores. What if every scream echoing from those black ships was someone they once loved? What if humanity wasn't just dying, it was being consumed from the inside out? The moment fractured the resistance. Some, desperate for hope, begged to believe it was proof that survivors lived inside, waiting to be rescued. Others swore it was a trick, a mimicry crafted by the Cathari to shatter their will. But Mara knew what she had heard. The cadence, the pause, the quiver of fear in her daughter's tono machine could fake that. It was her Leanne, and that truth poisoned her like fire, because it meant the line between enemy and family had just blurred into madness. As the resistance argued, the Cathari struck. The Broodguard came in greater numbers, crawling from the fissures the brood ship had torn into the earth. They moved with terrifying grace, neither fully machine nor flesh, their crystalline limbs dripping with something that steamed when it hit the ground. They were not an army, they were a tide. The resistance held the ruins as long as they could, guns cracking, explosives turning streets into death traps. But every fallen human left a hole too wide to fill. Mara fought like a fury, cutting through overseers with blades scavenged from their own corpses, but with each kill she wondered, was this one built from someone she knew? Was she ending her daughter's friends? Her neighbors? Piece by piece. The resistance broke from New Chicago, fleeing into the ash plains that stretched where forests had once stood. Smoke blackened the horizon, and the brood ships followed slowly, not rushing, as if confident there was nowhere to run. Jace Harlan led the retreat, his voice raw from shouting, his hands bloodied from carrying the wounded. He was exhausted, every step dragging the weight of guilt he could never shake, but he forced himself forward because the people behind him had no one else. In the tunnels he had been reckless, but now, with families clinging to scraps of life, he became steady. Every decision cut him open: who to carry, who to leave, where to hide, but he made them because no one else could. Ria carried her datapads pressed to her chest like a lifeline, her code whispering against the hive mind frequencies. She had uncovered something in the chaos, something that terrified her more than any There were fractures in the overseer's commands. The hive link was unstable, pulsing in irregular beats, as if the Cathari control was slipping. It was small, but it meant possibility. She told no one at first, not even Mara, because she feared what it might mean. If the hive link was breaking, then maybe humans could reclaim what had been taken. Or maybe it meant the overseers themselves, those stitched from human flesh, could think again, could remember. And if they remembered, what horrors might they carry? The suffering grew with every mile. The wounded cried out in the night, and silence meant death, but sound meant discovery. Mothers held their starving children tighter, rationing crumbs that barely kept them alive. The old begged to be left behind, and sometimes they were, swallowed by the smoke without a word. Courage became survival, survival became cruelty. Humanity had always believed itself moral, but under the shadow of the brood ships, morality shrank to a knife's edge. Mara herself had to decide who lived and who was left in the dirt. Her hands, once made for healing, now signed death sentences with every command. And then the traitor revealed himself. It was not dramatic, not cinematic, just a whisper in the night. A young man named Quarren, no more than 20, who had once worn the overseer's mark of collaborator on his wrist, slipped away from camp and led a bloodguard pack to their hiding place. The screams that followed were thunder, families torn apart, fighters ripped down in seconds. When Mara's blade found Quarren, he did not beg. He smiled, bloody teeth flashing, and spat at her feet. "Better a servant than meat," he hissed before she cut him down. The betrayal spread like rot, and the resistance knew now that the Cathari did not only take their bodies, they took their loyalty, their humanity, turning it into weapons sharper than steel. Yet even as trust cracked and grief hollowed them, humans adapted. Jace turned the ash planes themselves into weapons, wiring fuel lines beneath the scorched earth to ignite when Bloodguard passed. Rhea infected the hivelink with corrupted lullabies, fragments of human songs coded into digital poison. Overseers staggered mid-battle, their mouths spilling broken verses of nursery rhymes, a haunting echo of children long dead. And Maramara fought with something deeper than rage. Every time she heard her daughter's voice echo from the brood ship, she swore to carve through the universe itself if it meant pulling Leanne free. But the Cathari had more layers yet. One night, as storms of ash lashed the plains, a new voice cut through the frequencies. Not human, not overseer. A Cathari voice, translated into Earth's tongue, calm and venomous. "You are clever," it said. "Too clever. You break what you cannot understand. You think rebellion makes you free. But we do not harvest you because you are weak. We harvest you because you are strong, stronger than you should be. Your flesh feeds us, but your minds build us. You are not prey. You are architects of your own extinction." The voice lingered like poison in their ears, and the resistance knew this was no simple fight for survival. This was evolution, forced at the edge of a blade. Humanity's ingenuity was not only its weapon, it was the very reason the Cathari hungered. That revelation broke. Some men and women laid down their arms, whispering that resistance was pointless if their very existence fed the enemy. Others hardened, swearing that if humanity's strength was both curse and blessing, then they would wield it until their last breath. Mara chose the latter. Jace followed, though his heart carried fractures too deep to mend. And Rhea, shaking as she stared at her corrupted code, realized she was close, so close to breaking the hive link entirely. The turning point came not with a battle, but with a choice. A hidden bunker deep beneath the ash plains, sealed since before the Cathari came, filled with old-world weapons and food enough to last months. A miracle. But it had space for only a fraction of the survivors. If they entered, if they sealed the doors, they would live, but hundreds outside would be left to die. The resistance split. Some demanded safety. Others screamed betrayal. Mara stood at the threshold, her hands trembling, her daughter's voice still echoing in her head. Jace whispered that they had to survive to keep fighting, that sacrifices were inevitable. Rhea argued that abandoning the rest would kill not just bodies, but the very spirit that made humanity worth saving. In the end, Mara made her choice. She slammed the doors shut, not to save herself, but to seal the weapons inside so the Cathari could not claim them. She left the survivors outside, screaming, but she denied the enemy their prize. It was an act of mercy wrapped in cruelty, and it burned her soul raw. The resistance staggered onward, fewer now, more broken, but carrying weapons the Cathari had not accounted for. And as dawn broke over the ash plains, Mara raised her eyes to the brood ship, blotting out the sun. Her daughter's voice whispered again, faint, fragile, but their mother, free me. The war had changed. It was no longer just flesh against flesh. It was mind against mind, soul against soul. Humanity was not only fighting for survival, and they were fighting to reclaim themselves from the hunger that sought to erase them. The turning point had come. Whether it was salvation or damnation was yet to be written. The ash plains burned for days. Every horizon glowed with the fire of falling cities. Every dawn revealed new scars carved into the earth by brood ships that drank the land dry. Humanity's resistance was scattered to embers, fleeing in packs through tunnels, deserts, and ruins, clinging to scraps of life. But embers still burn, even when smothered, and Marave carried her ember like a torch through the darkness. She had weapons now, stolen from the old bunker, and the code Rhea had carved into the Overseer's hive link was spreading like a disease. Yet each step forward cost blood. The resistance was bleeding itself dry. Their last refuge was an underground fortress beneath the collapsed bones of an old hydroelectric dam. It was no paradise, only concrete walls cracked with age and water leaking through rusted pipes. But it was all they had left. Families crammed into bunk rooms, fighters sharpened blades made from scrap, and children whispered lullabies over the static of cracked radios to keep nightmares at bay. For one fleeting moment, it almost felt like a home. But every soul inside knew the Cathari would find them. The brood ships hung in the skies like vultures, waiting for the dying to still. And when they struck, there would be no second escape. Mara walked the halls like a ghost, her hands always trembling when she touched the walls, as though testing their strength. In the still hours, when the survivors slept, she would sit alone by the dripping pipes and listen to the frequencies, straining for her daughter's voice. It came to her often now, soft and broken, always the same words. Asterisk mother, free me. Asterisk every whisper was a knife. Some nights she believed it was truly Leon, her daughter trapped in the hive. Other nights she feared it was only the Ketharai mimicking her grief. And yet she could not let it go. Because to stop listening meant admitting her daughter was gone forever. That hope poisoned and fragilous the only thing that kept her moving. Jace Harlan had grown thin, the weight of command carving hollows beneath his eyes. He had become the voice the survivors leaned on, steady when all else trembled. But inside, he was breaking. He carried every name of the dead like stones in his chest. And each decision, who to feed, who to arm, who to abandon, piled more weight upon him. Some of the fighters had begun to whisper that Jace was too cautious, too willing to sacrifice victory for survival. Others saw him as the last sane man standing. He didn't care which they believed. He only knew that every time he closed his eyes, he saw his sons' faces behind the crystal gates, screaming for him to save them. Rhea buried herself in the hive link, her skin pale from nights without sleep, her fingers trembling with every new code she carved. She had found a way to fracture the Overseers further, to push human memories through their stolen cores. She had watched one Overseer collapse mid-battle, clutching its head and whispering the name of a woman long dead. It was working, but it terrified her. The more she learned, the clearer the truth became. The hive link was not just a control system, it was a prison. Human minds were trapped inside, their thoughts fueling the Ketheri's will. To shatter it meant risking all those souls. To leave it meant damning them to eternal slavery. She told no one, not yet. The siege began at dusk. The sky split open as the brood ship descended, its shadow swallowing the dam. The ground trembled, walls cracked, and the fortress filled with the sound of Overseers crawling through the tunnels. Floodlights flared, sirens screamed, and every fighter braced for the storm. The first wave hit like a hammer bread guard smashing through steel doors. Drones swarming vents, Overseers marching in perfect synchronization. The resistance fought with everything left in their bones. Grenades turned tunnels into firestorms, rifles cracked until barrels melted, blades clashed with crystal limbs in brutal, desperate silence. Children were dragged into corners as parents stood with knives, ready to buy them a few more breaths. It was slaughter. For every alien that fell, 5 humans went with them. The fortress shook with the weight of dying, and the corridors ran slick with blood and oil. Jace led charges down collapsing hallways, carrying the wounded on his shoulders until his knees buckled. Mara fought like a woman already dead, her blade cutting in arcs of fury, her screams carrying over the clash. And Riera sat in the command room, tears streaming down her face as she forced corrupted lullabies through the hive link, hearing Overseers stutter and cry with stolen human voices. She whispered apologies with every keystroke. Then came the betrayal. In the chaos, a squad guarding the western tunnel fell back too quickly, leaving a breach wide enough for the enemy to pour through. Mara cut her way to the front and saw the truth. It wasn't cowardice, it was sabotage. One of their own had disabled the explosives, his face pale and blank as he murmured in a language that wasn't his. The Cathari had broken him, twisted his mind through the hive link until he betrayed them without even knowing it. Mara didn't hesitate. She drove her blade through his chest, but it was too late. The bread guard surged through, and the western tunnel collapsed into screams. The fortress was crumbling. In the command room, Rhea's hand shook as she uncovered the last truth she had feared to face. The voice calling Mara's name wasn't just an echo. It was Leanne. The hive link was her prison, Her mind stretched across circuits, feeding commands into overseers. If Rhea severed the link, she would free countless human souls, but it would kill Lian. If she kept the link alive, she could save Mara's daughter, but humanity would remain enslaved. Her chest ached with the weight of it, her breath breaking as she stared at the code that could decide everything. Mara reached her breaking point in blood and fire. Surrounded by overseers, her blade broken, her body bleeding, she fell to her knees. And then the voice came again, louder, clearer, rising above the static. Mother, I am not yours anymore, but I can still fight. For a heartbeat, Mara swore she felt her daughter's hand on hers, warm and real. And in that heartbeat, something changed. The overseers around her hesitated, their movements stuttering, their heads twitching like puppets on broken strings. Jace saw it too. Hope flickered in his eyes, fragile as flame. Rhea, he screamed, overcomes now. Whatever you're holding back, do it. But Rhea's fingers froze. Tears blurred her vision. She knew what it meant. She knew the cost. To break the hive link was to kill Lian. To keep it was to doom humanity. She was no longer a scientist. She was executioner, judge, betrayer, savior all at once. The walls collapsed. The fortress filled with smoke and screams. Mara stood bleeding. Jace roared in defiance. Rhea hovered over the code with shaking hands. Every survivor knew this was the end, the moment where humanity either broke or burned brighter than it ever had before. And then the brood ship itself began to descend into the dam, tearing through concrete like paper, its maw opening wide enough to swallow the fortress whole. Its voice thundered through every wall, every soul. You are finished. You will feed us. You will become us. The sound, cracked bones, shattered glass, turned courage into ash. This was humanity's lowest moment, the point where hope seemed not just lost but impossible. And yet it was here, in the choking dark, that the choice became clear. Something had to change, or humanity would die. The screen of Rhea's datapad glowed against her tears. Her fingers hovered over the final line of code. Mara screamed her daughter's name. Jace roared for her to press it. The brood ship tore into the earth above them, and with one breath, one choice, everything would either end or begin again. The brood ship's maw thundered open above the fortress, its crystal teeth gnashing, its voice vibrating through stone and marrow as it promised the end of humanity. Overseers swarmed the tunnels, Bloodguard tore down barricades, and the survivors fought with nothing left but screams and steel. Mara stood bleeding, blade broken, her daughter's phantom voice still echoing in her mind. Jace roared like a cornered animal, dragging fighters back to their feet, trying to hold the lines. And in the command room, Rhea hovered over the final string of code, tears blinding her, knowing that pressing it meant killing Lian, but holding back meant enslaving all mankind. It was the lowest moment, the point where the ember of humanity seemed smothered beyond recovery. Then the twist came, the sound no one expected, the one noise that silenced even the brood ship's thunder. The fortress shook with a different rhythm, deep, seismic, alive. From beneath the earth, beneath the old hydroelectric dam, something ancient stirred. For years, the survivors had believed this place was just a ruin of humanity, as past a symbol of what had been lost. But as the brood ship carved into its bones, it awakened a secret buried since the first invasion. The dam's foundation wasn't just concrete and steel, it was a tomb. And in that tomb, humanity had hidden a weapon the Cathari had feared above all else. Rhea's console lit up with signals she had never seen before, encrypted frequencies older than the war itself. Her trembling fingers raced across the keys, unlocking layer after layer until the truth revealed itself. ***, Project Siren. ***, a failsafe, built in Earth's final days. A weapon not of bombs or fire, but of sound frequencies born from human brainwaves, capable of infecting hive links, turning the resonance of thought against the invaders. The Cathari had never destroyed the dam because they couldn't risk disturbing what lay inside. And now, as their brood ship tore into it, they had awakened it. The tunnels flooded with the hum of a rising pulse. At first it was just a vibration underfoot, but soon it grew into a aurora harmony of voices, millions strong. Every human mind ever enslaved in the hive link, screaming together. Overseers staggered, clutching their heads, their limbs twitching as static poured from their crystal forms. The Bloodguard convulsed mid-charge, collapsing in heaps of twitching flesh. Even the brood ship itself faltered in the sky, its voice warbling, its shadow trembling. Mara fell to her knees, the sound cutting through her grief like a blade. She heard her daughter's voice again, but not broken, not begging, strong, defiant. We are still here, Mother. All of us. For the first time. The whispers weren't just her child, they were the chorus of humanity itself. billions of stolen minds surging through the hivelink, fighting back. Tears burned her eyes as she rose, her broken blade clutched tight. "Then fight with me," she whispered. And the overseers before her froze, their heads tilting as if listening, before turning their weapons not on Herb, but on each other. Jace's laughter cut through the chaos, wild and furious, like a man reborn. "You hear that?" he bellowed, blood dripping from his mouth. "They're afraid. The bastards are afraid." His roar echoed through the fortress, rallying fighters who had been seconds from despair. They rose, battered and bleeding, and surged forward with knives, with pipes, with bare fists if nothing else. Humanity's defiance roared louder than the broodship's thunder. Rhea's hands flew over the console, her mind racing. She realized now what the Cathari had feared all along, not humanity's weapons, not its armies, but its voices, its capacity to share memory, to sing grief and hope in the same breath, to carry every dead soul forward in defiance. The hivelink wasn't just a prison, it was a bridge, and through that bridge, humanity could rewrite the laws of war. "We can turn them," she whispered, her voice trembling with awe. "We can make the hive ours." The broodship screamed, a sound that cracked walls and ruptured ears, its fear spilling into every frequency. It tried to silence the chorus, flooding the hivelink with waves of static, but the human voices only grew louder, harmonizing into a storm that no alien will could crush. Overseers fell in droves, their crystal bodies shattering as they tore themselves apart. Bloodguard turned their claws on the sky, shrieking as they ripped through their own ranks. And above, the broodship itself shuddered, its hull fracturing, its descent turning to panic. Mara fought with fire in her veins, her daughter's strength in every swing, every scream. She carved through drones as if possessed, each kill a prayer, each strike a hymn. Jace bellowed orders that weren't just commands but rallying cries, his voice rising over the chaos like a war drum. And Rhea, hands trembling, poured every ounce of code, every note of stolen lullabies, into the hivelink, weaving the chorus tighter, making the voices unstoppable. The twist was undeniable. The Cathari had never been gods. They had never been unbreakable. They had been parasites feeding on humanity's resonance, twisting it into chains. But now those chains were broken, and the resonance was turning against them. The hunters had become the hunted. The broodship's voice cracked, shattering into a dozen panicked tones. "You cannot! You will not! We are endless," but even its defiance faltered as the chorus roared back. Billions of human voices united in a single word, asterisk enough. Asterisk. The broodship convulsed, its crystal hull fracturing, collapsing into itself in a cascade of light and ash. The ground shook as its carcass struck the earth, and the fortress filled with silence broken only by the ragged breathing of the living. Mara stood amidst the wreckage, her chest heaving, her face streaked with blood and tears. She looked at Rhea, who sat slumped over the console, hands still trembling. "What did we do?" Mara whispered. Rhea's eyes, red and hollow, met hers. "We showed them," she said softly, "what it means to be human." But even in victory, dread lingered, because as the hivelink pulsed with dying static, Mara still heard her daughter's voice, faint but resolute. Asterisk. "This is not the end, Mother. They will come again. But now, they fear us." Asterisk. And deep in her heart, Mara knew the truth. Humanity was no longer prey. They had become something far more dangerous. The survivors emerged from the fortress into dawn, watching the smoke rise from the broodship's corpse. For the first time in years, the sky was clear. Children touched the light with wonder. Fighters dropped their weapons, laughing, sobbing, embracing. But none of them mistook it for peace. It was not an ending, it was a beginning. Humanity had turned the enemy's greatest strength into its downfall, had broken their chains and forged them into weapons. The HFY moment was undeniable. Fragile, bloodied, starving humanity had stood against the infinite swarm and won, not with technology, not with firepower, but with the one thing the aliens could never comprehend, the unyielding resonance of human defiance. And somewhere, out in the void, the rest of the Cathari heard the echo of their broodship's death. For the first time in their endless conquest, they felt something alien to them, something they had never expected from prey. Fear. The dawn that broke over the ruined dam was not gentle. It bled across the horizon like a wound, cutting the ash-choked sky with fire. Beneath it, humanity's last fortress stood half-collapsed, surrounded by wreckage, shattered overseers, twisted Bloodguard. The husk of the broodship cracked open like the carcass of some fallen god. Survivors staggered out into the light, bloodied and burned, staring up in stunned silence at a sky that, for the first time in years, did not belong to their enemy. Yet the air still thrummed with danger. The hivelink had been fractured but not destroyed. its frequencies trembling with voices both liberated and enslaved. Humanity had scored its first true victory, but victories were dangerous things. Victories made the swarm notice. Rhea sat slumped against the console, fingers raw and bleeding from hours of tearing code into the hivelink. Every breath rattled, every blink fought against blackness, but she had no time to collapse. The console still pulsed with signal streamers of other brood ships, countless more circling the planet, converging now that one of their own had fallen. She looked up at Mara and Jace, her voice hoarse. "They're coming. Not a strike force. The whole fleet. We broke their illusion of control, and now they'll burn the world to prove we're still prey." Mara tightened her grip on her broken blade. Her face was smeared with blood, her body swayed with exhaustion, but her eyes burned with something fiercer than fire. "Then we show them again," she said. "We don't run this time." Jay sparked a laugh that was half despair, half awe. "There are thousands of them, Mara. We've got a bunker, a handful of rifles, and enough food for a week." She turned to him, voice steady, raw with the weight of every loss. "We've got us. That's enough." And in that moment, Rhea made her decision. Project Siren wasn't just a failsafe, it was a weapon, unfinished, incomplete, because the engineers who built it had never lived long enough to finish the code. She could finish it now, but at a cost. To amplify the resonance of human voices, to turn it from a fracture into a storm capable of reaching the stars, she would need more than a console. She would need living conduits. People willing to pour their own minds into the link, to burn their identities into the system so the chorus became an inferno. Volunteers would not come back. Their souls would remain woven into the hivelink forever, fighting as echoes. When Rhea explained it, silence fell across the fortress. No one moved, no one breathed. Then Mara stepped forward without hesitation. "If it means freeing the others, I'll go." Jace grabbed her arm, eyes blazing. "No. You've already lost too much. You don't get to throw yourself away." She met his stare with fire. "It's not throwing away. It's fighting. It's the only way I can still hold my daughter's hand." The argument tore through the survivors. Some begged to fight with flesh and steel. Others demanded the chance to be conduits, to burn their names into eternity. But in the end, it wasn't a choice of one or the other. It was both. Humanity would stand in blood and bone while its bravest gave their minds to the storm. Flesh and spirit, together, in defiance. The swarm arrived at dusk, the horizon filled with brood ships, blotting out the dying sun until the world was cast in shadow. Overseers descended like a tide, crystal limbs cutting through stone, their voices shrieking across the hivelink. The ground shook as Broodguard swarmed forward, rivers of muscle and claw. Above it all, the great carrier ship eclipsed the sky, its voice a thunder that promised annihilation. "You will kneel. You will feed us. Humanity is nothing." But then the roar began. Not from machines, not from weapons, from throats, from hearts, from every survivor who stood in the ruins of the dam. Shouting until their voices broke, every word, a declaration. Asterisk, "We are still here." Asterisk. Rhea triggered the code, her console blazing like a sun, and the volunteers Mara, 3 fighters, an old teacher, a child no older than 12 stepped forward. They placed their hands on the conduits, closed their eyes, and let themselves burn. The effect was immediate. The hivelink convulsed, shrieking as their voices joined the storm. Leanne's voice rose among them, no longer broken, no longer enslaved. She sang her mother's name with strength, with pride, with love. Mara's body collapsed, her last breath a whisper of relief, but her spirit surged into the chorus, her blade now a song of defiance across the hivelink. Overseers staggered mid-charge, their movements faltering as the storm consumed them. Broodguard turned on each other, tearing flesh from bone in frenzies of confusion. Jace led the survivors in the tunnels, his rifle blazing, his voice roaring over the cacophony. "Push them back! Push them into the fire!" Fighters surged beside him, hacking, stabbing, screaming until their throats bled. Children carried ammo. Parents fought with kitchen knives. Every breath was a rebellion. The chorus grew until it was deafening, every liberated soul adding its voice, every conduit burning brighter. The hivelink fractured, splintering into shards of thought and memory. Overseers screamed, not in dominance but in terror, their voices collapsing into static. The brood ships trembled in the sky, their great hulls cracking under the weight of resonance they could not withstand. And above them all, the carrier screamed, "We are endless! We are eternal!" The storm answered with the only word that mattered. Asterisk no. Asterisk. The carrier split apart, shattering in a blaze of light that turned night to day. The brood ships convulsed, exploding in cascades of crystalline fire, raining down across the plains. The overseers collapsed in heaps of twitching glass, their voices silenced, The blood guard fell in rivers of steaming flesh. The sky cleared, not with ash, but with light stars visible for the first time in years. The survivors stood in silence, weapons trembling in their hands, tears streaking through blood and soot. The battlefield was a graveyard, but it was also something else. Proof. Humanity had not only survived, humanity had roared, and the galaxy had heard it. Rhea staggered from the console, her face pale, her body collapsing into Jace's arms. "It worked," she whispered, though her voice cracked with grief. "They're free. All of them." Jace held her, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with tears he could not stop. "Not all," he said softly, thinking of Mara, of the volunteers who had chosen fire. Rhea nodded, her heart breaking but her voice steady. "No, but enough. Enough to prove we'll never bow." And then, in the silence of victory, the hive-link pulsed one last time. Not with commands, not with alien shrieks, with human voices. Morass, Leanne's, the countless others who had given themselves to the storm. They sang not words, but something deeper, a promise. Humanity was not finished. Humanity was not prey. Humanity had become a force the swarm could no longer ignore. The survivors looked up at the stars, their tears drying in the dawn. For the first time in years, hope didn't feel fragile. It felt dangerous. It felt alive. And Jace whispered the words that would echo through the ages. "Let them come. We'll be waiting, because this was not the end. This was the beginning." Humanity had roared, and the universe would never forget the sound. The battlefield of the dam was quiet now, though it had once been the mouth of hell itself. The last brood ship's carcass still smoldered, split open like a broken idol, its crystals flickering as if even in death it was reluctant to surrender. Overseers lay shattered across the ash, their voices silenced forever. The ground was littered with bodies, human and alien alike, but among the ruins, survivors stood thin, bloodied, hollow-eyed, and yet alive. For the first time in generations, the swarm was gone. For the first time, Earth belonged to humans again. Jay stood at the edge of the crater, his rifle strapped across his back, his body barely able to hold its own weight. He looked like a man carved from exhaustion, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Light. Beside him, Rhea leaned heavily against the console she had dragged to the surface, the machine still glowing faintly with the resonance of the chorus. She could hear them, the voices of those who had sacrificed themselves to become the storm. Mara's voice, Leah, 1,000 others who would never walk again but would never be forgotten. They were not gone. They were part of humanity's legacy, woven into the song that had broken the invaders. The survivors gathered in the ruins, children clinging to the hands of scarred fighters, elders whispering prayers over the dead. They had no illusions. The war wasn't over. The swarm had lost a fleet, but the galaxy was vast, and the Cathari had never been just one world's nightmare. More would come. Yet something fundamental had shifted. The invincible had been made mortal. The predators had been made prey. Humanity had proven it could bite back. Days turned to weeks as the survivors rebuilt their shattered refuge into something more. They dug new tunnels, fortified walls, and planted gardens in the cracks of the old dam. For the first time, they looked beyond survival and toward living. The children were taught not just to fight, but to read, to dream, to speak of stars with wonder instead of fear. Around fires, elders told the story of the Rortha night, when humanity's voices shook the sky and toppled gods. And every telling was different, yet all ended the same, with defiance, with pride, with the promise that they were not finished. Rhea worked tirelessly, refining Project Siren into something beyond a weapon. She called it Asterisk, the bridge. Asterisk, it wasn't just for war, anymore it was for connection. The hiveling could carry voices, but it could also carry memory, song, story. Through it, humanity could preserve every soul, every moment, every lesson. The Cathari had tried to use the hivelink as chains, but now humanity would use it as wings. Rhea often sat alone, her fingers on the console, speaking softly into the silence. And sometimes, when the wind was still, she swore she heard Mara's laughter, or Leanne's voice humming an old lullaby. It was not grief, it was continuity. It was human evolution, sci-fi redemption made real. Jace became the reluctant leader of what remained, not because he wanted it, but because no one else could carry it. He forged alliances between survivors scattered across ruined cities, calling them together into something like a council. The first resistance was over, but a new one was beginning, not against extinction, but against despair. He knew the swarm would return someday. He also knew humanity would not meet them as victims again. They would meet them as a species reborn. There were scars, of course. Every face bore them. The cost of victory was etched in the bones of every survivor. But scars are proof of healing, not just of pain. Humanity had endured its darkest night and found not just survival, but purpose. They were not rebuilding the old world, they were building something new. A civilization carved from fire, grounded in memory, aimed at the stars, and the galaxy was watching. Wreckage of the broodships drifted in orbit, silent beacons broadcasting the resonance of the roar. Other species, some enslaved, some hiding, some who had never dared resist heard it. The first whispers came across the void, alien resistance movements, daring to dream, daring to fight, daring to believe that if humanity could break their chains, so could they. Humanity had become a myth among the stars, a story told in hushed tones, a symbol of rebellion. Fragile, starving Earth had done what none thought possible, and that made them dangerous. On the anniversary of the battle, the survivors gathered on the dam's cracked roof. They lit fires, not for warmth, but as beacons, torches raised to the night sky. Children held them high, their voices lifted in songs that blended grief with joy, sorrow with triumph. And when the flames burned brightest, Jace raised his voice over the crowd. "This is our legacy," he said, his words raw, unpolished, but heavy with truth. "Not the ruins we stand in, not the blood we've spilled. Our legacy is that we stood, that we fought when the universe told us to die. That we roared when they tried to silence us. And when they come again, then we will roar louder. Because humanity doesn't kneel. Humanity rises." Cheers thundered through the ruins, echoing against the hills. For the first time in years, it wasn't just a cry of survival, it was a declaration of destiny. Rhea whispered to herself as she watched the children dance around the flames. This is what Mara gave her life for. This is what Leanne wanted. A future. She touched the console, hearing faint laughter ripple back in return, as if the dead were smiling with her. And so humanity's story, once thought to end in ash, became something else. A beginning. A species battered, scarred, and bloodied had been forged into steel. No longer prey, no longer silent. Humanity had roared, and the roar had become legacy. The galaxy would never forget it, and neither would we. Did this story hit you as hard as it hit us? What would you do in humanity's final hour? Drop your ideas for the next HFY story below.